All right. So let's actually get to the final part that we should be trying to cover today, and it's the materials. As you can see in the file, I already have preloaded some materials. Whoops. And whoops, what did I do? Okay. And I'll show you both how to change some of these materials, but also how to download materials off of the internet. Okay. So these are these are all sort of car paint, sort of glossy car paint materials. The easiest way to kind of access any of this is actually just go to the materials tab and just right click, and all the options are in the right click menu. And there are two main ways that you do this. Oh, well, actually three, but we'll get to the third. But for now, let's look at the two. The first one is the MXM Browser right here. And if you click on the browser, you'll pull up a window that looks like this. And this is the database. So this is basically where all your material files are saved. You may not have this many. I've sort of copied some from the older versions, and this is basically what I've accumulated. So I will actually be linking a file in the course website for this week, an Arrowway Materials Collections.zip. All right. In that zip file, what you will find is basically a collection of preset materials that they have provided you for download, and these are basically the sort of previews, so tiles, blah blah blah, as well as all the associated sort of texture maps that come with it. Right. So that's a a place to start. But otherwise, that's the same. You can go to the resources website. You make a account, right? Go to MXM Materials, and then you can download these guys. As well as there's a visual catalog sort of setting here, new best ranking, blah blah. Sort through the pages, but I usually think the best way is actually just do a search, right? In terms of what you're looking for in particular. So there's new, best ranking, all these stuff. There are a lot of pages. So this, for example, what is it? HT stainless steel brush 2, right? So I can click on download. It'll make a zip file here. So if I click on the zip file, you'll see that it basically has both, the textures and the MXM file, right? So the MXM file is the Maxwell materials file. And this is actually the file that you will need to basically stick in the right folder. All right, so I have a folder specifically for my downloaded materials because it just works. For me, it works better that way. Okay, so basically what I did was I extracted all the contents of that folder, of that zip file, into my main Maxwell Materials Database MXM files folder, right? And it doesn't have to be in the downloads folder, it can be anywhere else. This is just the folder structure I have. In your guys' case, it probably is in Maxwell 3 Materials Database, MXM files, and you just stick it here, and it'll be able to find it, right? All of those things. And after that, it'll show up in your database manager, or basically if you right click MXM Browser, it'll show up here. These are sort of organized in different folders. The one I put it in is downloads, so it shows up here as HT stainless steel brush 2. If you double click on it, it will actually give you a preview of what it should look like when you apply it. All right, so to get it into the scene, however, for example, and this is a downloaded material, you drag and drop it in here, right? So you have to know actually this is separate from this. What's in your materials database these are the base versions. You can make changes to these once they're in the sort of scene manager file. You can make changes to this and it won't actually affect whatever is before it, okay? Now, okay, so we can try and see if it works. using Maxwell Fire and apply it and see. Okay, yeah. So you can kind of see the sort of stainless steel texture. These are textures because they're more complicated. They will take a little bit longer to clear out or render. So keep that in mind. But as soon as you apply it, if everything is right, when you double click on it and doesn't have any bad paths, that means it's not missing any texture files, right? Otherwise, you might have to go in and find it and relink it. And I'll sort of try to cover that in another video. But if everything is working as intended, then this is what should happen. All right. So this is method one, where you actually download a file, put it somewhere, or put it in your sort of materials database, and then try to link to it. Okay. All right. The other sort of, in my opinion, a little bit more streamlined version is actually this. So you right click and you go to the MXM Gallery. This will bring up a window, and you have to be connected to the internet for this, but basically you also need to log in to the website, but basically you can just search here and say, let's say stainless steel, right? And actually brings up in the database some of the stainless steels that you can find. So brushed. If you double click on it, it will bring up a sort of larger preview. So this is actually, I think, the one that we had earlier, HD stainless steel brush 2, metal stainless. So these are all different versions, right? Oh, that's the quilted one. Okay. So for example, if you find something like this that you like, then what you can do is basically import. Right, so you highlight it and click on import. And you need to be signed in for this. So if you didn't have, you know, like an account on this website, then this won't work, right? You'll need to have to make an account for the website, etc., etc. So to import, and it comes in, right, automatically into your scene manager. So sometimes that might be an easier way, although I don't think that they have exactly the same materials that you can find on the website. So I'll apply that. And fire it up. So you'll see, okay, this is a very, very high reflectivity material. So it has a kind of cool bump mapping effect, right, with the sort of unevenness in the surface that's applied, so you don't get like a perfect reflection on everything, right? So that's a pretty cool material, but you also have to realize that this, because of the reflectivity, it will actually take, you know, much longer for it to clear out correctly when you actually send it to render, right? But this actually gives you a pretty good idea of what that looks like. Now, the interesting thing about this method of importing found textures that I really like is that it basically automatically collects stuff for you. What that means is that, I'll let it render. What that means is that if I go to the folder where I have my Rhino file, which is here, like I have my Taurus not Rhino file, you'll see that when you import it, something that way, it automatically creates a folder called MXM Gallery. And it puts the texture in there. So this is the texture that we just imported, as well as the bump maps that are associated with it, right? So when you move things around, as long as you're moving your overall folder that has your Rhino file and this MXM Gallery file, then you're good, right? You don't lose it. It's always followed, and it's sort of looking at things relatively. So that's really, really nice. The other version where you actually had to put it in, you know, your central computer materials database only works if you're using your own computer, really. So I'll delete this out, and you'll see that basically I lose, well, I should be losing the textures on that, And let's do that again for a different material. Let's say a mesh. So yeah, let's try this wire mesh. We'll import that. It downloads it, imports it, and we'll apply this. And let's refresh it. Now, you'll see that the wire mesh is actually there. It's semi-transparent. It's probably on a much smaller scale. So we'll have to actually, as with all, textures that have a scale, apply Uvw mapping to it, right? So texture mapping, box mapping, you should all sort of know this by now. Apply Uvw mapping, and then let's actually change the size of this. So let's make it much larger. So I don't know, 20, 20, 20 block. And you might have to refresh. Okay, so this is an example, actually. It's a good example. The texture, when you import it, it's actually missing stuff. So it has bad paths, yes, right? If you see this, you can click on it and you'll see, okay, it's missing some things. And unfortunately, not all of the material that they put online, if you look at here, you'll get a red sort of block saying it's missing a texture, right? You'll get a sort of this sort of report. Unfortunately, not all of the materials that you can find online or in the gallery are sort of formatted correctly. So sometimes you might have to kind of, do a couple tries or use the website method that I showed you earlier. So that's not always guaranteed to work, unfortunately. Let's try importing one of these. So this should work. Oh, there you go. It's probably doing this because my texture mapping size is way too large. Let's bump this down to 100 and refresh it. Okay, so you'll see that this actually is a much smaller scale material. So I'm just sort of changing my size and scaling it down to 1, maybe 0.75, and just sort of refreshing the Maxwell fire to kind of get the changes to work. So you'll see that this volume is now has a sort of hexagon mesh material applied to it that you can see on all 4 sides. Kind of interesting, right? So you can actually do these sort of basically open materials as well, or you can apply these sort of open materials. All right. You can make a new material just like that, and this is a normal sort of white diffuse material. The place where you change its color really is if you click on the BSDF layer and you change reflectance 0. This is where you change its color. So if I make it red, okay, and I can refresh its preview, it'll turn red. This is just for like normal, simple diffuse materials, right? Or white. Now, for white materials, it's always a bad idea to have these 3, the RGB values at 255, the maximum you want this to be, and you can just sort of drag this, well, usually, you can just sort of drag this slider down to around 230, say okay, refresh it, and that's a white material. There is a link here about realistic material reflectance that kind of explains why if you have a scene with all white materials with 255 for your RGB values, which is pure white. A pure white material does not exist in the physical world, right? So this rendering, you'll see they have everything set at 225, and this is just like a more detailed explanation of why and why all that is true, right? But just remember that if you're making white material, 230 is about as high as you want to go for the reflectance 0 value. So you can make your own colored materials that way. It's really simple and easy. Okay. Like that. So that's basically, that should be white. Now if the color isn't really white, it's usually because your lighting, right? Your environmental lighting, it's it's blue tinged in this case. Or it's it might be yellowish or reddish. It depends on your sun color. Okay, but this is a white material. All right. So last type of material I want to show you really quick here is the AGS Glass material, and there will also be a description on the website here as well. Architectural glass solution. These shows you what AGS glasses look like. But it's really simple as well. You right click here, go to Material Wizard, AGS, and then it will ask you to pick a color. So you can specify a color, let's say blue, say OK. How reflective you want it to be as a percentage, a normal or clear. Let's just use normal and make it maybe 20% reflectivity, OK. And create a new material, AGSW, right? Okay. And so if we try to apply something to that, then you'll see it's sort of simulating in sort of like a bubble film, which means like as in a film, like sort of soap bubble, right? So it kind of has a shadow outline, but it's really easy to compute for the computer or for the render engine, right? And you can kind of see it there. You can also always kind of go back here and change these values to make it darker or lighter, or just sort of make it more reflective, less reflective. But sometimes I just find it usually just easier, instead of messing around those values, just to make a new one. Just like that, and say, well, this time let's try to make it darker. And if I make it super, well, let's say 50 reflective, what happens? Create a new one. You can always rename it, right? And if you apply it, then it becomes a much darker version of the glass, right? So you can actually just like put them in side by side and compare them. Right, so this is just sort of like a really quick shortcut to making glass that's easy to render and won't take too much time, and just sort of make life easier for yourself. Obviously, on the Maxwell Render websites, there are a lot of really, really nice glasses. So if you sort of just search glass, there are a lot of really nice glasses, but some of these I can tell you will take quite a while, and you can see some of their rendered previews. Actually, this is a fast one. Yeah, this is the AGS sort of type glass. So this is actually a fast glass that you can use pretty well. Some of the, let's for example like this, right? These are very realistic glasses, as you can see from the rendering previews, but you have to get the lighting and the settings down for it to work correctly. All right, so there's a lot of stuff you can try out and explore. I tend to try out my materials in a scene like this because it's small, it's fast to render. I try not to test out my materials in my design files because those are usually heavy. They take quite a while to render, and you waste a lot of time just waiting. All right, so that's about it for this session, and we'll sort of get into more detailed interior lighting and all that sort of jazz in the next video.